Okay, let's unpack something fundamental. We all grow up with this idea that childhood is just, well, childhood.
Mm,
It feels like a natural, universal stage, something biological everyone goes through, like learning to walk.
right, sort of taken for granted.
Exactly. But what if that familiar picture isn't the whole story? What if the very idea, the experience of childhood isn't just a biological given, but something society actively shapes and defines?
That's precisely the core insight sociologists bring to this topic.
Hmm.
They argue that childhood is profoundly a social construction.
A social construction.
Yeah, it's not a fixed biological phase, but something whose meaning, expectations, and lived reality differ dramatically depending on when and where you live.
Right. And that's what this deep dive is all about. We spent time with a stack of material articles, research notes, all exploring this sociological perspective.
Mhm.
Our mission is to cut through the complexity and pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge. Especially if you're a sociology student grappling with this concept, consider this your essential guide to understanding why seeing childhood as socially constructed is so crucial.
Yeah, it's a foundational idea.
We're going to explore the evidence, look at the debates, and see what it means for children today.
So maybe let's nail down that core term first, social construction. When sociologists say something is socially constructed, what they mean is its existence and significance aren't inherent or universal.
Okay.
They are entirely dependent on the cultural beliefs, the laws, the norms, and the historical context of a particular society.
Exactly. The material draws a comparison to things like gender or race. While there are biological differences, the meaning we attach to those differences, the roles, the expectations, the experiences associated with them, that's all built by society.
Yeah, that's a really good parallel.
And this deep dive shows us that childhood is the same. What it means to be a child shifts depending on the era, the place, and even your social background within that place.
And there are three main pillars of evidence sociologists use to support this idea, sort of three main strands.
Okay, tell us about them.
First, how childhood varies significantly across different cultures.
Right?
Second, how the concept and experience of childhood have changed throughout history.
Uh-huh.
And third, how experiences of childhood aren't uniform, even within the same society today.
Okay, let's dive into the first one then. Childhood across cultures. This is where the differences can be truly striking, can't they?
Oh, absolutely.
In what's often termed Western societies, the dominant idea is that children should be shielded from adult burdens, spend their time learning in school, playing. They're largely dependent. It's this lengthy period set apart from adulthood.
That's the ideal, yeah. But look at examples from some developing parts of the world highlighted in our material. You find children taking on heavy adult responsibilities from a very young age.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, working long hours in factories, being the primary caregiver for younger siblings, or in horrific cases, being recruited into armed groups. Just some completely different realities.
Wow, those contrasts are incredibly sharp.
They are. And the key insight here is precisely that. These dramatic differences show us how culture deeply shapes the daily reality and expectations placed on a child, far more than just their biological age.
So society writes the script,
Society writes the script for what being a child means.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
which leads us right into the second type of evidence, looking through history. The work of historian Philippe Arias is often cited here,
Yes, Arias.
suggesting that in medieval Europe, the idea of childhood as a distinct, emotionally separate stage didn't really exist in the way we understand it now.
Not at all. Children were often simply integrated into adult life and work, viewed in many ways as miniature adults. They participated in adult work, adult social activities, much less differentiation.
Right, just smaller people doing adult things.
Pretty much. The concept of a protected separate stage really gained traction with the profound changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries.
And that makes a lot of sense. As work moved out of the home and into factories,
Yeah.
and, with the growing need for a literate workforce, society had to adapt its structure.
Absolutely. Our material points to crucial legal changes that solidified this new view. Laws making education compulsory.
Ah, yes, the 1880 Education Act in the UK is mentioned.
Exactly, starting things off. Then there were increasing restrictions placed on child labor, and laws focused specifically on child protection began to emerge.
So the weren't just rules, they were society actively creating the modern definition of childhood, a phase characterized by mandatory education, legal protection, and extended dependency on adults.
It was a social invention, you could say, driven by economic and social shifts.
A social invention. I like that.
Precisely. And the third, equally important piece of evidence is that even within one society today, childhood isn't a single, uniform experience. Our sources use the UK as a prime example here.
Like the stark differences tied to social class. That seems like a big one.
Exactly. The statistic that around 1 in 4 children in the UK live in poverty is incredibly telling. Think about how that reality impacts their health, their access to good schools, their opportunities for enriching activities.
Compared to a child growing up in a wealthy family.
Their childhoods are lived worlds apart, just fundamentally different experiences based on class.
And gender plays a role too, right? Our material mentions that girls often face more parental restrictions on their independence and are more likely to take on caring roles at home.
That's right. Studies highlight this, like the one by Brannon and Body, finding that Asian girls, for instance, often had greater household responsibilities and stricter supervision than boys.
Interesting.
And a study by Jens Bonk showed that generally girls tend to do more housework than boys, particularly in single-parent households.
So your experience of being a child, even within the same culture, can be significantly shaped by factors like your class, your gender, or your ethnic background.
Definitely not a universal experience lived out identically by everyone.
No.
What's fascinating here is how these internal variations within a society powerfully reinforce the idea that social factors are key to defining and experiencing childhood, not just biology.
It really drives that point home. Okay, so let's look at contemporary Britain through this lens. The perception is often that it's a very child-centered society today.
You hear that a lot.
And there are factors that support this view. Families are smaller, meaning more resources potentially invested per child. Living standards generally are higher than in the past.
More disposable income for kid-related things.
Right, and there are extensive legal protections for children. A massive market exists for child-specific products and services. Toys, clothes, entertainment.
And with compulsory education now extending potentially until 18, that period of dependency on adults is longer than ever before.
So it looks like a highly privileged and protected stage of life.
On the surface, yes. But here's the critical sociological point the material emphasizes. This perceived privilege and protection are absolutely not experienced equally by all children.
Okay.
And this leads to the different sociological perspectives on what childhood is like today. Big debates here.
Right, like the March of Progress view.
Yes, often linked to functionalist thinking. This view argues that, looking across history, childhood really has improved dramatically. Children are healthier, safer, and receive a better education than previous generations.
So things are just getting better.
They see society becoming more child-centered as a positive sign of social progress overall. A good thing.
Okay, a positive outlook. But then there's the critical view.
And this perspective, drawing on Marxist and feminist insights, presents a much different picture, a much more critical one, as the name suggests.
Oh, right.
They argue that despite the apparent improvements, children remain subject to significant oppression and control by adults. Think about legal restrictions on their independence, for example, where they can go, what they can do.
Things adults take for granted.
Exactly. These can be seen as limiting their autonomy, and they emphasize the power imbalances we just discussed.
The ones based on class, gender, ethnicity.
Right. Arguing they exist not just between adults and children, but among children themselves, leading to profoundly unequal experiences.
So progress hasn't reached everyone equally.
Far from it, they'd argue. And they point to challenging data, like the UNICEF finding mentioned in the sources, that British children rank among the unhappiest in the developed world.
Really, unhappiest.
Yeah, struggling with issues like mental health, educational pressures, and relationships. This data provides strong evidence supporting the critical view and complicates that simple idea of inevitable progress.
It definitely throws a different light on things. And if we broaden our scope globally, the picture gets even more complex.
Oh, massively. The material includes findings like those of Katz, who found children in places as different as Sudan and the U.S., facing similar struggles tied to the pressures of global capitalism.
Wow, so common threads despite different contexts.
And Judith N. New's reminder that for countless children worldwide, daily life is still dominated by work, poverty, and exploitation experiences, a world away from the Western child-centered ideal.
So that Western ideal is definitely not universal.
Not even close. Which brings up a significant debate. Is the concept of childhood as this distinct, separate phase actually disappearing, or is it simply changing shape?
Ah, the disappearing childhood thesis. Neil Postman famously argued it was disappearing.
Yes, a very influential argument.
He pointed to things like children being exposed to adult content through the internet and media, a perceived loss of innocence, a faster push towards adult behaviors.
And the rise of consumerism giving children significant pester power as consumers. He saw the clear boundaries between childhood and adulthood eroding.
Like the lines are blurring.
Exactly. And others, like Sue Palmer, warn of a toxic childhood, linking it to factors like over-reliance on technology, parents working very long hours, and consumer culture potentially harming healthy development.
That paints a concerning picture. But the counter-argument is that it's not disappearing, just evolving.
Yes, that's the other side. This view suggests that while some traditional boundaries may be shifting, children are also actively creating their own unique culture and spaces, particularly online.
So the internet isn't just a negative force.
Well, it's complex. While it exposes them to adult material, it also allows them to build communities and forms of interaction largely independent of adults. New forms of childhood culture, maybe.
And the global push for children's rights, drawing on Western ideas to challenge child labor and abuse worldwide, that could be seen as a transformation of the concept of childhood on a global scale, rather than its disappearance.
That's a good point. It's reshaping expectations globally. And paradoxically, our material also notes findings like Hillman et al.'s work.
What did they find?
They suggest that children's independent mobility and unsupervised freedom have actually decreased in many Western societies due to heightened safety concerns from parents.
So less freedom in some ways.
Yeah, so while some boundaries might blur online or through media, others related to physical freedom are actually getting tighter. It's a very complex, changing landscape, not a simple answer.
It absolutely is complex. And all this discussion about vulnerability and the power dynamics inherent in the social construction of childhood, it naturally leads us to a difficult but crucial consequence highlighted in the material: child abuse.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's part of the picture. Seeing childhood as a socially defined stage where individuals are typically less powerful and more dependent on adults makes their vulnerability clear.
It makes sense that vulnerability exists.
The material outlines the types of child abuse: physical, emotional, sexual abuse, and neglect. Awful realities.
And while there are psychological explanations, the sociological perspective, particularly relevant to our deep dive, focuses on those power imbalances within families and societal structures as key factors.
Right. Abuse is often a devastating manifestation of the power adults hold over children within the context society has constructed for family life. It's about power dynamics playing out in harmful ways.
The material also briefly touches on domestic abuse, noting the ONS 2019 data showing women are more likely victims. And while this often involves adult relationships, the sociological explanations offer radical feminist views on patriarchy and male control, Marxist feminist views on economic dependency and inequality.
And new right views linking it to family instability.
Right. They all point to how broader social structures create power dynamics and vulnerabilities within the family unit itself.
Exactly. Understanding these dynamics is crucial because they create the environment in which children might experience abuse or neglect. It shows the harsh real-world consequences of the power structures that define family and childhood.
Okay, so we've navigated this complex landscape. We've traced the idea of childhood across cultures, through history, and looked at the varied experiences within societies today.
Yeah, quite a journey.
We've grappled with the debates about whether it's progressing or marked by control, disappearing, or just changing, and confronted the reality of vulnerability and abuse that can arise from these social structures.
And the absolute key takeaway, particularly if you're diving into this for your studies, is that understanding childhood as a social construction is foundational. It's step one, really.
It forces us to move past, assuming it's just a universal biological given.
And instead see it as a powerful social phenomenon, shaped by us, by society.
It allows us to recognize the immense inequalities in children's lives, both globally and right on our doorstep. You can't ignore them once you see it this way.
No, you can't, and it empowers us to critically question the way society structures childhood, the value it places on children, and whose interests are truly being served by our current definitions and laws.
It really makes you think.
It shows us that childhood isn't a fixed point. It's a dynamic reflection of society's values, priorities, and power structures. It tells us a lot about ourselves as a society.
So, considering the vast differences we've seen across time and place, and the ongoing debates about what childhood even is today,
Mm-hmm.
if childhood is truly something society constructs,
Hmm.
what responsibilities does society actually have towards children? And how should this deeper understanding of its social construction guide our efforts to make childhood better and more equitable for every child?
That's the big question, isn't it? Something powerful to think about long after this deep dive ends.